So the illustration. See, that's 26.
I was thinking about the difference in the terms between difficult and hard, because hard is like digging a trench, it's hard, and difficult is kind of got some more complexities to it than digging a trench. It was probably difficult and hard simultaneously, in that the actual object itself, as much as we had got all of the kind of planned all of the dimensions, the angles, the different sorts of measurements that were required to get the artwork as it was that we anticipated. Of course, over a 40-metre length, which is what the length of the drawing is, of the actual object is, when there's a drawing of that object in space, it's quite a different experience than the actual object in space, given its compound curves and various things. So really the first day was really having to kind of readjust just minutely the measurements that had been done beforehand, in order to actually accommodate the fact that it wasn't an actual object in space. And then the next 2 days was just rubbing and rubbing and rubbing. So yeah, but it was great. We got it all done, and success.
And did you do the same point several times?
Yeah. So the singular blade is 40 metres long, and the gallery wall is 17 metres long. So I was never going to get, obviously, the whole work on one wall. So rather than doing the singular rubbing of a singular blade for 40 metres and then just showing the 17 metres of one tip of it, we actually decided to make, because it's a one-to-one rubbing, it's an actual real sized object, which is what I was trying to get at, this enormity of this singular object, and then hopefully get a sense of its repercussions in terms of its enormity as a capacity to generate clean energy. So instead of doing a singular blade, we end up doing the same blade 5 times, as if it was actually sweeping through the gallery wall. So it's, again, this is where all the angles come into. So it's got one that is basically vertical, and then one that sweeps off to the left and off to the left and off to the left. So it's actually the same tip done 5 times. And the first one is the longest, and it's probably about 6 metres or so, 5 metres. And then the next one's a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter as it sweeps out of the gallery space when it's hung. So yes, I'm very familiar with the tip of that particular wind turbine blade. All the tips have got a beautiful little tiny circle on the little disc, which is a lightning conductor, for obviously when they get struck by lightning, which on this enormous 40-metre blade, it's just this tiny little disc on both sides of the tip of it. So that's obviously something that was very noticeable, but then it's also got 2 little repair patches on this particular one, so that in the rubbing is actually quite pronounced, is this little circle and then these 2 little patches. So you see that similarity, and it's kind of nice. Printmaking is such an interesting medium in that it inherently is about multiplicity, about producing more than one thing. And most often the rubbings that I do, because they're so big, I just do it once. Whereas this is the first time I've actually done a multiple version of the same object as a rubbing. And I think that's quite interesting because I really wanted to feel like it was that same blade that was going around and around. So yeah, re-rubbing that same thing 5 times, as much as, you know, you do the first one, you think, oh my God, I've got to start again now. And then you start again. The only good thing is we started with the longest first, and then the next one, and then the final one was the shortest. So it did go quite quickly in the end. I'm going to guess the one that's the most familiar to many of us here in WA is the one at Rottnest, because it actually is quite close to the settlement, and furthermore it's quite small. So I think in that sense it's sort of almost like it's like a mini version of it. But when you actually see the big ones, they are magically huge and distant and kind of remote. So there's that sense of being in proximity to something that is usually not stationary or static, the blade of a wind turbine, like they are built to move permanently. But also that, I guess, a slightly more romantic idea of being in close proximity to something that one would not normally touch. And because the process I use of rubbing is so haptic and tactile, and you know, you're on the surface of the thing, that kind of dual impossibility of A, it being still, and B, you then being in proximity to it for the duration of making the rubbing is kind of an interesting combination. But I think, too, returning back to the overall premise for this project, to me part of visualizing energy futures is actually to make them comprehensible, make it somehow in some way have a human perspective to it, or because it's like anything. I think we don't have a sense of what something is until we understand it from our own perspective. And so I guess the thought of being in close proximity to a wind turbine, 1, and a wind turbine blade, 2, that is stationary, I think it's kind of an interesting way of actually bringing a human perspective to that entity, that thing.